Just 12 days after Elden Ring was released, speedrunner Lilaggy would complete the game in just under 1 hour. While this is normally a benchmark for games, it wouldn't be in the case of Elden Ring, because over the next few days, more discoveries and route changes would cut the time in half. Today we're going to be looking at the glitches that make this run possible, because there are a lot of them, from breaking the boss AI to parkour skips, and even wrong warps that skip the majority of the game. I hope you enjoy today's video. The any% speedrun skips a lot of content. To understand how much time is saved, we'll start by taking a high-level look at what's required in a casual playthrough. Some of the key areas in the game are locked behind drops from bosses, so to go from the beginning to the end as fast as possible, there are 12 required boss fights. This makes a glitchless route very straightforward, but since this is any%, you can count on a lot of these fights being skipped or glitched. But before we get to them, let's have a look at the beginning of the run. The Samurai is the class of choice for this route because it starts with 15 dexterity, and the weapon that will be doing all of the work in the few bosses we do fight is the Icerind Hatchet, which conveniently requires 16 dex. There are two reasons the Hatchet is so important. The first is because it comes with the Hoarfrost Stomp skill, which is incredibly strong on its own, but the second reason pushes it over the top, as it's upgraded using somber smithing stones. These stones are used to upgrade unique weapons in the game, and the Icerind Hatchet only takes 1 stone per upgrade as opposed to multiple stones like a regular weapon. For this reason, the early game focuses on collecting somber smithing stones so that the weapon is almost fully upgraded before the first boss is even fought. We'll get to one of the few bosses in a bit, because the first major skip of the run is going to take us from the starting area all the way to Farum Azula, a location that you normally wouldn't encounter until around level 90. To get to Farum Azula normally, you need to kill the Fire Giant, which requires killing Morgott, which requires killing Godfrey, which requires killing 2 bosses with Great Runes to get into the Lindell Royal Capital. It's quite the violent task to do this normally, so to avoid this needless bloodshed, we're going to skip it all. Near the starting area is a location called the 4 Belfries that house 3 waygates that allow you to warp to different locations across the map, and one of these locations happens to be Farum Azula. The area it warps you to is closed off from the rest of the locale, as it's only intended to give you a brief look at one of the later levels. But for our purposes, this will serve just fine, because this sneak peek serves as a basis for a wrong warp. When you arrive at the Belfry location, you'll want to touch the Site of Grace, then use the warp to enter the preview area for Farum Azula. Once you arrive, you'll use a special item called the Memory of Grace, a starting item that lets you warp to the last Site of Grace that you visited, which is currently in Belfry. While the animation for the Memory of Grace is playing, you'll want to open up the fast travel menu, select and confirm the Stormhill Shack, and then wait for the fun to begin. After the loading screen, your character will be below the world and start to fall, but a quick save and quit will remedy this perilous situation. At this point, the game is good and confused about where it should put you due to the warps we just layered on top of each other, and in its infinite wisdom, it decides that it will place you in the starting area of the last location you were in, which is Farum Azula. This shatters the restrictions placed on you by the preview area, and you're now fully able to explore this late game location at the insanely high level of 9. You'd think that having just skipped 90% of the game, we'd finally be ready to fight a boss, but instead, there's another warp to set up, and it's even more unique than the last one. There's an NPC that's appeared in many FromSoft games named Patches, making his first appearance in 2008's Armored Core 4 Answer. He would quickly become a fan favorite in the Souls series, where he plays the role of a scoundrel. His MO is to kick you off a cliff, but in Elden Ring, he reveals something a bit more interesting, in addition to kicking you off a cliff. In dialogue with Patches, he hints that an enemy called the Iron Virgin was once imbued with the ability to transport people that went inside of it, and that there is one beneath the water wheel of Raya Lucaria Academy. He goes on to say that it will transport you to the bottom of the Eld Tree, and it's left to the player to decide if this is a trick to get you killed or sound advice. There's only one way to find out what happens if you're caught by an Iron Virgin, and that's to offer yourself up to it. But before we get there, there's one piece of tech that runners use when traveling to the bottom of the water wheel, and that's the zombie grab. This saves about 20 seconds overall, and to pull it off, you'll want to aggro a zombie close to the ledge, because during its grab animation, it will move both of you in the direction that it's facing. If you fall off the cliff during the animation, you won't take any fall damage, which skips having to take the long way down. Once you get to the bottom, it turns out that Patches wasn't lying about the Iron Virgin, and if you let it devour you, you'll find that you're warped not to the bottom of the Eld Tree, but to the Volcano Manor. This is fortunate because it lets us collect more somber smithing stones and fight the first boss of the run, the Godskin Noble. Except we're going to take a page from our old pal Patch's book and do something underhanded. Glitch the boss AI so we can steal his runes without a fight. Due to how the stairs are positioned leading into this area, if you enter the fog gate at max range, the game fails to load the AI of the boss because you don't walk through the entire gate and hit the boss activation trigger. If your positioning is off slightly, you can get stuck inside of the fog wall, but if done correctly, you're in for a Patches approved boss fight. With 50,000 runes in our pocket, it's time to upgrade our stats and drop some more smithing stones into the hatchet, because we finally have the first boss fight in the game, the Godskin Duo. Not being content with how much he was embarrassed in our last encounter, the Godskin Noble has called his friend the Godskin Apostle for backup in what is easily the hardest fight in the run. Equipped with powerful ranged attacks and high damaged melee, the Godskin Duo are an incredibly tough fight, even with an overpowered weapon and spell. With an attack like Hoarfrost Stomp, you're probably thinking that the best strat is to stack both bosses and stomp away, but this actually makes your chances of dying very high, since you now have to contend with heavy damage attacks from both bosses at the same time. Instead, the goal is to isolate the larger boss and use a bug with the Royal Knight's Resolve skill that lets us put its one-time 80% damage increase on another weapon. This is important to do because the bosses share a main health bar in addition to their individual ones, and if one of them dies before the main bar is depleted, it will revive after a short time. Using the glitch with Resolve, you can overkill each of the bosses to deal more damage to the main health bar, which cuts down on the amount of times they will respawn. If you execute the fight correctly, you'll kill the large Godskin, then the small one, and only have to deal with the large one respawning once before the fight's over. When you're done humiliating the Godskin, the Malekith fight isn't far away, but just like the Godskin battle, you literally stomp your way to victory in a matter of seconds, and then it's time for another sequence break, the Gideon tree skip. This isn't a technical skip like the others, it involves some precise jumps on an otherwise unclimbable piece of terrain. If you perform the parkour well enough, you'll be able to access a higher area of the map and can then bypass the Gideon fight entirely as you'll drop down on the other side of it, exactly in front of the next boss, Godfrey, who we're also going to skip. Godfrey's fog gate isn't bordered by tall walls. Instead, there are stone fences that are about the height of your character, which would typically make them too high to jump over. But if you jump on the railing leading up to them, you can leap on top of the fence and then save and quit to have the game put you inside of the fog gate without starting the fight. Most of the time. This leaves the final bosses, Radagon and the Elden Beast, and if you think we're going to stomp our way to victory, you are right. But since this is a speedrun, we're going to take it one stomp further. Radagon falls relatively quickly to the Hoarfrost spam, but for the Elden Beast, we need to do something a bit more devious. Since he has a lot of attacks that involve creating distance, it's best to keep him close. And to do this, we're going to break his AI using a spirit summon. It's not entirely understood why this happens, but if you use a summon with 3 NPCs during this fight, reach a certain damage threshold on the boss, and have exactly one of the summons survive his attack, he will then stop attacking and sit still while you stomp away his remaining HP. This trick is very volatile, and it doesn't always work, which causes some frustration to runners, since it's the last thing in the run. One of the worst feelings you can have speedrunning is being on pace for a PB, only to have the last trick in the run take it away from you. So where does the record sit with all of these tricks coming together? Lilaggy would be the first person to do a sub-hour run, but with some of the new discoveries we just covered, Distortion 2 would set the first sub-50, sub-40, and sub-30 minute run. But on March 16th, disaster struck, as FromSoft released a patch for Elden Ring that had dire consequences for speedrunners. So let's have a look. Just below the bug fixes, you'll see the lengthy balance change section, and it says 2 things about Hoarfrost Stomp: decreased damage and increased cast time. So how much did they nerf it? The damage was cut by about 2/3, and the animation time was increased, which cuts its DPS and makes spamming it a lot more risky. The verdict for the current patch is that Hoarfrost is a dead build for speedrunning, and to make matters worse, the bug that allowed you to apply Royal Knight's Resolve to weapons without the skill was also fixed. This makes the current route dead in the water, and you may be thinking, why not just use a different weapon? But there's no easy replacement for the Icerind Hatchet. Due to it being unique, you can use the Somber Smithing Stones to upgrade it at a 1-to-1 ratio, and for a regular weapon to equal its strength, you would need to upgrade it to +25, which means time lost to farming. All hope isn't lost, however. There is a glitch that can zip you across the map. It wasn't understood what caused it, but through vigorous research, it was discovered that it works by walking forward on the frame the walk animation loops while you're blocking with a specific weapon. It's very difficult to perform, and could result in a new category being made altogether, but only the future will tell what the fallout of this glitch will hold. I hope you've enjoyed today's video. Be sure to check out Muftaay's channel, as he was a big help for this video. And if you like the content, consider checking out my Patreon for sneak peeks, behind-the-scenes updates, and exclusive content from time to time. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.